Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast, presented by the Chargers Podcast Network. My name is Steven, and I am the host, as always. And joining me is my guy, Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing tonight?
Yippee-ki-yay, Melon Farmer. It is Cowboys week. I am excited. It was nice having a bye week. You know, we didn't have to cover anything, really. But we're back. Monday Night Football is here. Steven, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I think I understand where the pop culture reference is to that one. So I missed the one from last week, but I'm doing great, man. It's been a nice week to recharge. You know, for our Chargers audience, I went back to Utah, visit some family for my brother's wedding, and got away from the screen for a little bit, and it was great. So we obviously did have to cover a trade last week, which we are going to dive into a little bit more today. We do have Brad Spielberger from Pro Football Focus joining us for about 20 minutes or so on this episode. Picked his brain a little bit about the financial side of things after the J.C. Jackson trade, and then just had some great conversation about the Chargers and the rest of the season, and it was a great time talking with Brad today.
Yeah, Brad's awesome. Sometimes listening to either Arjun or Brad is like listening to my grandpa talk about military history, where they just rattle off information, and you're just sitting there like, yep, totally makes sense. You just kind of nod your head. And Brad's one of the best, and for a reason. He knew everything right off the top of his head. He knew the Chargers' red zone efficiency right off the top of his head. I mean, he's awesome, and it's an honor to have him on.
Yeah, the preparation definitely stands out. For the financial stuff, I have to re-listen to Arjun and Brad a few times, and I'll text Arjun throughout the week. Okay, what does this mean? What is this? Where did they get this number from? And I really respect guys who just they're so tuned in and dialed in to stuff like that. So had a great conversation with Brad, and we're excited to get to that here in a minute. First and foremost, Tyler and I are fans of the team, just like you guys are. We've been granted this platform and are very grateful for it. But the opinions that we express on this show, on this platform, are strictly our own. They are not the opinion of the Chargers organization themselves. This is our outlet for us to talk about Charger football, and we're grateful for it. But the opinions are strictly our own. So that being said, let's get to this interview with Mr. Brad Spielberger. We're thrilled to be joined by Mr. Brad Spielberger from Pro Football Focus. He is one of the best in the business when it comes to breaking down the cap, breaking down the economic side of the NFL, and we're super excited to have him on today. We'll talk about some of the J.C. Jackson stuff, like I said, some of the repercussions from that trade. And then we'll also get some of Brad's analysis on just kind of the rest of the season. I know everybody's kind of talking about trades and who's good, who's bad, all this stuff. So we'll pick Brad's brain a lot about all of that, and excited to have him on here. So Brad, thanks for joining us, man. How you doing?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Doing well. Like you said, just getting ready for trade deadline season and all that madness. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
I'm kind of fanboying here because we have, Arjun, of course. We know Arjun. We all know Arjun. I've worked with Arjun. And he's said nothing but great things. So I'm kind of fanboying here because by reputation, you're the best. And anyone who's looked at cap projections or contract projections, if they're good, it's Brad. So I'm excited to have you on here.
Well, very, very kind. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of interviewing Brad on our channel. This is Tyler's first time. I usually do the interviews on my own on our channel. So excited to have Brad join both of us today. So let's jump into this J.C. Jackson conversation. Obviously, the team has moved on from a dialogue standpoint, and Michael Davis was talking about it. But fans are asking us, so we're going to ask you just kind of the financial repercussions from this. I know that there's always a lot of financial talk that gets tweeted out whenever these transactions happens, whenever a contract extension gets done. In terms of the short-term impact of trading J.C. Jackson, what is the impact, if any, for the Chargers cap sheet?
So for 2023, you do clear a little bit of money, the $1.55 million in salary that traveled to New England. Basically what they did is they converted that all out, spread it over the cap, and then traded him. That's how a lot of these deadline deals get done. I guess this isn't really a deadline deal, but is the inquiring team doesn't want to bring in that big salary, and in a situation like this, obviously they're not going to bring in that big salary. So the inherent team converts it all. That way it stays on their books and then sends a smaller salary across the table. So, yeah, $9.6 million dead cap this year and then a $20.8 million dead cap hit next year. So we're talking over $30 million in cap hit, for New England Patriots cornerback J.C. Jackson.
Yeah, so explain to me again, why is it that they have $20.8 million in dead cap next year because of this trade? Like, I see it, I sort of get it, but you can explain it better.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So before this trade went down, you already had the signing bonus was prorated over the 5 years of the deal. So there was already, I want to say $15 million. Is that right? $25 million signing bonus? I think that sounds right. So basically where it works is, let's say that's what it is. I think it's what it was. If you give a guy a $25 million signing bonus on a 5-year deal, there's going to be $5 million cap hits in all 5 years of the deal. Those don't go away. They don't disappear. They're still there. So when you trade him in his second season, the $5 million in the third through fifth year, they would all hit the cap next year. And then also, because of what I just talked about, because you converted, the lion's share of his remaining salary, I want to say over $10 million, that also gets spread out. So some of that hits this year, and then the majority of it actually hits the last 3 years because you're spreading that over 4 remaining years in that situation, and 3/4 of it will hit in 2024.
Gotcha. So the relief from getting off of this contract is more so a 2025 thing than it would be a 2024 thing. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, the relief really is just saving $1.5 million in salary for this year, because obviously, in 2025, hypothetically, he'd have no guaranteed salary remaining. You would still have the dead cap hits, of $10 million at that point. So yeah, I suppose so. But really what's happening is all that is accelerating up into 2024, and it's kind of a zero-sum game because you then can't carry over that cap space into the following year, right? You can carry over unused cap space from a certain season into the following year. So you'd either have it you'd either have the dead cap hit in 2025 or have it in 2024, but you have less, carryover cap. So it's kind of, the relief is just having him off the roster and just moving on.
Yeah, difficult either way there. One thing that I wasn't sure how much you know of, I certainly don't. There was this sort of talk going around that the Chargers could potentially file a grievance or something. I think they're mostly going to be past that. I think they've washed their hands and moved on. But just to ask you, because you're here. Now, it is going off of a report. We don't know this 100% to be sure, but it is from Ian Rappaport, and they did the work there to talk about how JC would refuse to go on the field week 4 against the Raiders. So if it were a thing, and if the Chargers were to pursue this, what is that? What does that entail?
Yeah, so look, those guys don't say stuff like that by accident. They often will put stuff out there that kind of helps build a case and build a potential narrative. I mean, the grievance would be refusing to, provide services, which is the player participating in football games. On all these little kind of nitpicky and like wishy-washy and stuff like that, it's very, very hard to do. They could file a grievance. They'd probably be going after. Essentially, the teams can try to go after the signing bonus money they already paid the signing bonus, but you're allowed to go after those proration amounts I just talked about. So you could say, all right, for the $15 million owed from 24 to 26, we could try to recoup that. It's very, very hard to accomplish. Like, if you do get cash back from the player, which I've talked to teams and agents about this, almost never happens. Like, they try, but good luck with that. If you do get that cash back, you would be able to get not only a cash relief, but also a salary cap credit. And there's a whole long process. While you're doing the grievance, there's a hold on your salary and 30% or 40% of your salary at the time. It's a whole convoluted process. My guess is they just kind of clean their hands and move on.
Yeah, it certainly sounds that way too, and we'll get to some of the on-field stuff. I'm curious now because we've seen some other trades happening recently too. The swapping of the 7th round and the 6th round pick. What does that really equate to, if anything, from a draft capital perspective?
It's effectively a wash, really, right? I mean, once you get outside of the first, I would say 4 rounds, in my opinion, not that those picks are not worth anything. They, of course, are. You're going to find gems. You're going to find good players in the later rounds. But, swapping a 6th for a 7th, your board, each team's board could have players that are 100 picks or 50 picks apart. So, it kind of is, it's really the NFL's version of a salary dump trade, right? We see it in the NBA. It's obviously, a whole different construct, and a good player and a first-round pick maybe goes somewhere because he's not a great player and is not worth this massive contract he's on. This is effectively the NFL's version. You're really just saying we want to get some cash and cap relief, and we're just swapping picks as something of a formality. Obviously, you move up around, which is nice, but yeah, I mean, my trade chart probably has it as a net benefit of less than a draft pick, because those late rounds are just so kind of cheap.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's continue with the theme of trades then while we're on this now. The Chargers obviously trading away a player. There was sort of a rumor circulating about them being interested in Chase Claypool. There are plenty of bad NFC teams right now, and some of them are looking for quarterbacks next year in a very good quarterback class. Do you see any of those teams being active? And I guess in particular, is there anybody in particular or a position in particular the Chargers could be looking at as you kind of assess the needs that they currently have heading to the rest of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think sticking with wide receiver, there's probably a couple teams. You're probably not going to engage with Denver just because you're in the division. But I think you look at Carolina, like there's some talented players like Terrace Marshall in Carolina, played 0 snaps this past week and had 9 catches in week 4. Kind of a bizarre, like that stuff kind of raises your sensors and should have the antenna go up, kind of wondering why that is the case. So I think he's a good player too, a former second-round pick, and obviously has kind of been in and out of the lineup. But when he does play, he's fairly productive. So I think that's one answer there. Look, I think the draft class, like Thule playing well, probably eliminates the need to add a rotational pass rusher, a third guy there. Obviously, Khalil Mack had a historic week the other weekend, so that's always good to see. I know Joey Bosa's dealing with the toe and whatever, but I think he'll get back in the mix there. But look, I mean, this is one of the more expensive rosters in the NFL. I don't think they're making any sort of big-time move. I think, yeah, like a Terrace Marshall at corner, I've been asked this a bunch. Like, it's hard to think of a name of a solid starting cornerback. The only name I would throw out there, and I guess he probably did – no, he missed Brandon Staley in Chicago. But Jalen Johnson with the Chicago Bears, I do think is the one name that I think would provide an upgrade to a lot of football teams as a good outside corner that I think is probably actually available. So maybe him as well.
Yeah, we're kind of talking about this without talking about it, but I think for the Chargers and what they're looking for a potential like trade target, right, is somebody that's cheap, somebody that's young, somebody that's on an expiring deal. There's a lot of requests out there that we get for these guys who are on 3-year contracts and things like that, but with all these ramifications from the JC trade and all the restructuring, like it's the guys who are cheap or on expiring deals that really should be the focus for this team.
Yeah, look, I mean, you want to make a push this year. You obviously have a lot of older players that might not be on the roster next year. I know we'll get into it in a little bit here. I still think they're fine. They're 2-2. They could go into the bye at the perfect time. They're alive in the thick of things. I mean, plenty of AFC teams have not really made the most of the early portion of the season. So, it's not like they're in their own company. But yes, no, if they're making a trade for me, it's a guy on a rookie contract. Like you said, probably the 4th year of a rookie contract. That's the target.
Yeah, let's talk about the rest of the team and the rest of the year. So they're obviously at 2-2. I think Steven had them going 10-7 the rest of the way. I had them at 9-8. I still can't get over the 17-game thing. I can't do the math with that. I'm slightly more pessimistic than Steven, but I guess the quote-unquote good news is the rest of the AFC in front of them has not really been quite what we thought it was going to be, certainly not with Cincinnati, the Steelers, the Patriots, of course, the Jets losing Aaron Rodgers. Where do you kind of see the Chargers filling in the rest of the way here? I think me and Steven have them still making the playoffs, still being, solid in terms of record, but where do you see them the rest of the way?
Yeah, I'm right with you guys. 9-10 wins. I mean, you probably have all 4 games against Las Vegas and Denver still left. So, we're not going to count W's. I'm on a Chargers podcast. I'm not about to count W's, but that should be 4 wins in theory. At least three wins out of those 4. So, you can find some easy wins on the schedule. But yeah, for me, they're a wild card team that maybe if they get hot at the right time or they stay healthy. I mean, look, their offense is still, top 5 in EPA per play, top 10 in success rate. That side of the ball obviously is going to carry you, late in the season, and the defense can't really be all that much worse. And so maybe it does improve to enough of a degree where, again, they get hot at the right time and make a run. So yeah, 10-7, 9-8 is right where I would have it as well.
Yeah, let's talk about that offense too, because I think like there was so much curiosity about what this Kellen Moore, Justin Herbert marriage would look like, if you will. From afar, what's been your kind of evaluation of what Kellen Moore has brought to the table so far as offensive coordinator? And we'll dive into the matchup here specifically for the Cowboys, but Kellen Moore in general, what's been your thought process there?
The biggest noticeable thing so far through a month and 4 games is the red zone efficiency, which was not a strong suit last year. And in Dallas, they were a top 3 red zone team. And I want to say the Chargers right now are 5th in conversion rate to touchdowns. Off the top of my head, they're definitely top 10. They're up in that conversation. And like from a schematic standpoint, from a stylistic standpoint, I think he's scheming up more free releases, more bunch formations and stacks and different things to kind of enable players to get a little bit of room to operate. I mean, it also helps when Keenan Allen's just running, butt naked wide open on 20 dropbacks in a row in a game. That always helps too. But yeah, I think it really is just, and you saw it with Dallas against San Francisco. I mean, their guys are just blanketed the entire time. It's a static offense. You're not hitting the ball. You're not getting the ball to playmakers in space with a full head of steam. And I think that's the biggest thing is like getting the ball to playmakers on the move. I think we've seen more of that. I know everyone, talks about Lombardi last year and all the various things. And, look, throwing short, I think we are getting into a conversation of maybe Justin Herbert also needs to just trust himself to uncork it downfield more. Like, we can't solely blame Joe Lombardi. But the big thing for me is their offense was so static. It was all comeback routes and stick and curl and hitch. And it was just like these guys can run. Like, get them the ball with a head of steam. And I think we've seen a lot more of that this year.
Yeah, it's been a surprise, and Steven and I will talk about the Cowboys specifically after this, but watching with Brandon Cooks, for example, I think more than anybody else on that team, you expect with the trade, and you're going to bring in this guy, and he's going to have the explosive plays. I mean, he's been that guy throughout his entire career, and I think he's on pace for like 248 yards this season. This is a guy who has, every year he's healthy, 1,000 yards, 1,000 yards, 1,000 yards. It's just, It's been very different. It's been a surprise. I think Cowboys fans were certainly surprised and maybe regretting being so harsh on Kellen Moore last year.
I was convinced. I fell for the trap. I was like, Mike McCarthy's going to be fine. He's not going to be terrible. And look, it's early, of course. And, outside of yesterday's game, they basically, in Arizona, they've had these game scripts where there's no reason to push the ball down the field the first 3 weeks they played. But yeah, it did not look good against San Fran at all.
Yeah, it's we'll dive into some of this too, but like the Kellen Moore returns for me have been so much fun to watch because, there's a plan each and every week. It's a different plan here. It's a different plan there. You're playing to your strengths. And that was kind of like the theme of training camp is like, we're going to take these guys that we have and we're going to allow them to play to their strengths. We're not going to try and make Joshua Kelly into an outside zone edge runner because he's better in the middle. We're not going to make Mike Williams only play on the outside because he can also play in the slot. Obviously Mike is injured now, but we'll see what happens there. You mentioned the wide receiver thing. I'm curious to get your thoughts here about the Joshua Palmer, Quentin Johnston dynamic, because I think a lot of fans might be a little frustrated at the lack of usage for Quentin Johnston. And maybe, there's some doubts about Joshua Palmer. What do you make of those two players right now and how they're being used and what Justin Herbert is able to get out of those two?
I understand the frustration, but I thought Quentin Johnston was an extremely raw prospect. Didn't really run a very complex route tree. Even like his releases, I think he was just a better athlete than most players he played against. In college, obviously a gifted physical talents, but not a lot of nuance on his routes. You don't see him selling things or faking inside and going out all the little details that don't matter at TCU and matter a whole lot when you're playing in the NFL. So I get it. I know you want to see him more. I know you want to see more targets that aren't behind the line of scrimmage. We saw the highlights at TC of him going up and making contested catches, stuff like that. Josh Palmer, look, the ceiling is not super high. We know who he is, but I think he's a very high floor, solid football player. You do go back to the issue of not having a lot of explosiveness, which in theory was kind of why you'd want a Quentin Johnston. But yeah, I mean, look. I think that's maybe why you do add a speedster or something of that nature. I mean, Terrace Marshall's a good downfield target. Last year had a 90 grade on passes, 10-plus yards downfield, at one drop on 25 targets. He's good. He's good downfield. But yeah, I understand the frustration, but I don't know. I kind of get why he's being brought along slowly, although maybe that changes out of this bye.
Yeah, definitely could. Regarding Marshall, there could definitely be something there. The Chargers have obviously done a trade with Carolina with Trey Turner before. And then they have some connection there with Frank Reich. So that is potentially something there. What do you weigh then? How do you weigh the investment in a first-round pick when it's a receiver? It's a first-round pick. You have a very cost-controlled player for, we're assuming, maybe 5 years here. How do you weigh, waiting for what seems to be now with Quentin Johnston, maybe an entire year to get him to really be the guy in 2024 versus finding someone with maybe a lower ceiling, but he's playing right now?
Philosophy for the draft and less so in the first round, maybe to a degree, and of course less so if the context of your roster, which is my opinion. Again, the window is Justin Herbert's career, but there is a window right now with a lot of these players that are currently on the roster. But I think it was smart to take him because Mike Williams, and again, like the injury aside, obviously feel bad for him, but I didn't know if Mike Williams or Keenan Allen was going to be on the roster in 2024. I think Keenan Allen's probably playing his way into that being the case now. But, I don't know if he dealt with hammies for 10 weeks again this season. I could see that not being the case. So, knock on wood, I'm not trying to jinx the guy. But yeah, so I get it. I'm cool with it. I like the idea because I'm always a fan of you draft for the future, you draft and develop. And you want to, in the first round in particular, you want to hit high upside guys that could turn into, force multipliers and true difference makers, not just like good football players, But I also get the argument, the other way.
Yeah, well, we'll get you out of here with a couple more questions here. There's a lot of MVP talk happening already. Certain quarterback in San Francisco is kind of the hot topic right now. But we'll focus this in on Justin Herbert. What do you think his MVP case is this year, and what would really have to happen for him to make a strong case for that MVP kind of push down the stretch of this season?
I think there probably could be a case or a narrative around if he has to get on all these shootouts and throw their way to victory because the defense is not playing well, and obviously now Austin Ekeler has missed time. Josh Kelly didn't really make the most of that opportunity. So I think that would be the narrative is like he has to score 30 points to win every game. The Minnesota game, I thought he was exceptional. A couple other games this season, look, and I also love him just because he avoids turnovers. He also has a good pressure to sack rate, always does. Always one of our highest graded quarterbacks against pressure, which is supposed to be a super unstable stat, and yet he keeps showing up high in the metric year after year. Good against the blitz, like all those things. So I think the contextual components of just A, what he has to do to keep his team in games, but then B, we like to see more explosiveness, more touchdown throws, all that. But limiting the negatives is so important for this team right now, and he's as good as anyone at avoiding turnover-worthy plays.
Yeah, got to do that this week. I think the next 2 weeks for sure are narrative-changing kind of plays, or at least pushing those things with the Cowboys and the Chiefs. Got to ask you before we get out of here, what is your prediction for the Chargers this Monday against the Cowboys?
I think it's going to be a shootout. I know that the total was at 48 at open. I hopped on the over. It's already at 51, I think. So I'm not trying to brag about my closing line value. It's probably going to lose now that I said that. But no, I really do think it's going to be a shootout. It's interesting. Dallas now, for me, with the loss of Leighton Vander Esch, they already lost to Marbion Overshown before the season. Their linebacker core right now is scary. And then they're talking about already Micah Parsons now playing more off ball, which I get that you're thin there, but okay, you're going to take your best pass rusher, a top 5 pass rusher in the NFL, out of the defensive line. That's great. That's great news. The Chargers probably love to read that headline today. Yeah. So I think you can attack the middle of the field against this team really well right now. And look, I like their safeties, but all three of them I think are good players. But I think attacking the second level, Keenan Allen just feasting, Josh Palmer as well, though. Getting Austin Ekeler, it seems like he'll be back in the fold. I think he can make their second-level defenders miss in space and rack up a ton of yards after the catch against his team. So that side I love. But then, on the defensive side, this Cowboys offensive line has been awesome. I mean, you have a healthy unit now across the board. Tyler Smith is our highest-rated guard in the NFL. Tyron Smith, whenever he's healthy, he's awesome, and so on and so forth. So I really do think both teams are going to score, and it's going to be a classic. Whoever has the ball last probably wins the game. Another heart attack for Chargers fans like every Sunday.
I didn't hear a score prediction in there, though.
Score prediction, I will give you 31-27 Chargers.
Hey,
okay, cool.
There we go. Love to see it. Brad, really appreciate it, man. One of our favorite interviews to do. Glad you were able to join us on the Chargers official channel. So can't thank you enough for your time. Appreciate all the great work that you do, and we hope to chat soon down the road.
Appreciate you guys a ton. Yeah, of course.
All right. Again, shout out to Brad, one of the best in the business. If you're not following him, I strongly encourage you to go do that. Does great articles, whether you're a financial nerd, whether you're a draft nerd, or just want to talk about football. Brad's a great follow. Does some great work in the Chicago area as well for Bears fans. Whoever, if you know a Bears fan, send them Brad's way. Tyler, any final thoughts about our discussion with Brad this morning before we jump into our planned show for the rest of the episode?
Mostly just, I still feel like I need a bit more time to figure out why the whole $20.8 million next year happened, and if that was really in the best interest for them to do that. But again, like we talked about, it was more about the player exiting the team and being somewhere else than it necessarily being a cap thing.
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it. And we saw some of this last year with the Jerry Tillery conversation. Obviously, Jerry Tillery was not, on a long-term deal. He was still on his rookie contract. But we've talked a lot about, like, the hope for the secondary is that now, without all of this situation kind of, hovering over them, that things can kind of settle down. The roles are more defined. And Michael Davis talked about that today at the Chargers practice. Just being unsettled a little bit with where he's at in the rotation, who's starting, who's playing here, who's matching up there. Now things are all calmed down. Everybody knows what their role is. Everybody knows what the expectations are going forward. So hopefully this Chargers cornerback room can start playing like they did at the end of last season, and the Chargers defense in general would really benefit from that group, starting to perform in expectations.
Yeah, I really think that, and this is definitely not the focus of the episode today, but I really am hopeful that that situation being resolved and just having the bye week, it's like, you're R3. Go do what you did last year. Go be great. And I really think that they will be, I don't know how much better, but I think they will be better.
Yeah, I think so too. And, it's just going to be exciting to see, like they have some positive matchups coming up from a cornerback receiver standpoint. And, hopefully that this group can really start to round into form in the secondary. And, Derwin James should be back this week against the Cowboys, and Alohi Gilman should be back this week too. So reinforcements coming for the Chargers defense coming off of their best performance against the Raiders. So hopefully the arrow is pointing up for this unit. All right, the focus of our group, we don't get to talk a whole lot about like coaching matchups on our podcast feed. It's a lot about individual player matchups and key statistics and things like that. But we couldn't possibly not talk about Chargers and Cowboys and not talk about Kellen Moore versus Mike McCarthy and how these two kind of match up as respective offensive minds and what we're really seeing from these two units. Obviously, the Cowboys coming off of a pretty embarrassing loss at the hands of the San Francisco 49ers. So I do expect them to be highly motivated to, have a positive response against the Chargers on Monday night. But Tyler, when you look at how like the dialogue happened about like the Cowboys are moving on from Kellen Moore, he's coming to the Chargers, what's kind of your evaluation of where do we stand now after 5 weeks of the NFL season regarding these two coaches and how they're kind of working their offenses out?
Where we stand now is thank you. I really appreciate this offensive coordinator. I'm happy to have him. I'll say that much. I think that sometimes you always hope for grass is greener, and I get it. Last year the Cowboys maybe weren't what they hoped to be. Certainly not in the postseason, and so they wanted to just do something else, find something different. You go get Brandon Cooks. Here comes the explosive offense or whatever. Kellen Moore. We heard from Cowboys fans all offseason. No, it's just Joe Lombardi 2.0. Well, I think looking through Dallas Cowboys and their stats so far, they got the Joe Lombardi experience so far with Mike McCarthy. Literally today, from Mike McCarthy, a little quote from him. This team is about defense. Make no bones about it. Of course we want to score as many points as everybody, but we play to our defense. That's the strength of our team. And by doing that, the time of possession, taking care of the football, those are two things that I thought were improvements from past years, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, this offense, the head coach is suggesting that they're a defensive-driven team, and they're basically just going to be not turning the football over and sort of being conservative without coming out and saying it. And that is certainly the case. I mean, if you look anywhere, I talked about it when we were interviewing Brad, but Brandon Cooks was the guy you brought in to have explosive plays, and they're not getting him the football. They're targeting him, but they're not getting it to him. And if they are, he's not really doing what he's really been known to. I mean, Brandon Cooks is a player, 6 seasons over 1,000 yards, someone who's averaged, almost 14 yards per reception his entire career. It's at 8 right now. Like, it is not what you would expect for someone with Brandon Cooks. And for some context, if you look at Joe Lombardi and like Jalen Guyton, for example, even Jalen Guyton was at 14.5 yards per reception. So that is just not working right now. It is Dak Prescott's lowest big-time throw rate of his career, I believe. It is also his lowest turnover-worthy play rate, which is good, of course, but it's a very conservative offense. It is not one that wants to, as we've discussed the offseason, run up the scoreboard and put up tons of points. I mean, he literally just said as much that they're looking to maybe just complement their defense, which I sort of understand because the defense was touted as being so great and they have a lot of great players. But, I mean, this is a very, very, very conservative offense. And we're even right down to fourth down play calling or going for it or not going for it. I might be off by this just a little bit, but Brandon Staley is, I think, first or second in the league right now in terms of going for it when he should. So he's first in the league. Mike McCarthy, second worst in the league in terms of, going. Now, is that a good decision or not necessarily? I don't know. I don't know the results of how the Cowboys have done. But when the math says go for it, Mike McCarthy has been more conservative. So Prescott, way more conservative. The offense overall more conservative. They're moving down the the field efficiently, but they're not scoring in the red zone. I mean, they've dropped off dramatically. That's where we can start talking about Kellen Moore. The one thing I wanted out of Kellen Moore for this offense, the number one stat I wanted to see with Kellen Moore coming over, wasn't necessarily rushing yards per attempt or number of deep passes or ADOT. It was red zone touchdown efficiency. I mean, I really wanted, that was a stat I wanted that the Cowboys had last year, and they were number one in the league at 71% or whatever it was, and the Chargers were 18th at 54.5%. With Kellen Moore, the Chargers are 13% better at almost 69%. They are right behind the San Francisco 49ers. Anytime you're around the San Francisco 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs, you're doing something well. So the Chargers that's pretty good. So fifth in the NFL is so great. Conversely, the Dallas Cowboys now have dropped almost 35% to 28th in the league in red zone touchdown percentage. And look, that offense is all there. I mean, you got the quarterback, you added a receiver. I like your tight end in Ferguson. Your offensive line, it hasn't been healthy all year, but it's healthy now. I mean, and they dropped 35%. So the Chargers are at almost 69%, and the Cowboys have fallen to 36.84%. So they're really missing him, Kellen Moore. And it's not that they're a bad offense. They're efficient, but they're not explosive, and they're not scoring in the red zone like the Chargers have been. So I think right now, in terms of what we looked at before the season to now, I'd say Cowboys fans are probably wishing they had Kellen Moore back. Granted, look, I know that Justin Herbert's the quarterback, so that does change some things, but
sure,
I think the Chargers got the better end of the deal so far.
Yeah, we've talked about Kellen Moore specifically and how much we've loved what we've seen from a game plan perspective, from a usage standpoint for the most part. There's definitely some things that you can nitpick here, but Brad's point about it being not static versus static, I think is a great one, man. And that's something that I noticed watching the Cowboys on tape this week. I really genuinely felt like I was watching the 2022 Chargers offense on tape again. Michael Gallup and Brandon Cooks, you're on this side, you're on that side, you're going to stay on that side. And CeeDee Lamb's in the slot and for 75% of his routes. And there's no motion, there's no creativity. It's a quick step drop, balls out, try and get the guys in space, but there's just no real motion. There's no real, creativity about this offense right now. And that can work against some bad defenses, which was the case for the most part outside of the Jets in the first 4 games. But then when you play a team like the 49ers, who is very capable of jumping routes, being physical, disrupting the timing, you end up getting the performance that the Cowboys had on offense this past week. And, you look at Dak's average time to throw, and for if you take out the 49ers game, it's 2.3 seconds, which is insanely high. Tua against the Chargers was 2.4, and 2.3 seconds. That's literally I take the snap, I take my drop, ball's out. There's no reading, there's no processing, there's no motion, there's nothing. Ball is out in a hurry. And that's a lot of what the Chargers were trying to do last year. Granted, some of that is due to injury, as we've talked about on our show, but there's no 2023 offense in the Cowboys right now. It's all this West Coast basic concepts, and we'll talk about this throughout the week, right? But for the Chargers, the game plan is pretty simple for me. You have to be physical, you have to press, you have to disrupt timing, and that's how you get the Cowboys out of their rhythm, because that's what the Cowboys want. They want rhythm and just get 5-6 yards every single play, stay ahead of the chains, and not be in these long down distance things. But it was really funny, man. I watched 3 Cowboys games last night, and I really felt like I was just watching the Joe Lombardi offense all over again. And not that I didn't expect there to be some of that, but Mike McCarthy had some time away from the league. He was the head coach without being the play caller. I was expecting some changes from what, the offense was at the time of his Green Bay. And you hear all the complaints from Aaron Rodgers at that time. There's no motion, there's no creativity, and now it's the same kind of stuff again with Dak Prescott. So it's just is a really interesting dynamic here because Kellen Moore is taking advantage of his guys. There's different plans every single week. There's creative touches for Darius Davis. There's none of that going on in Dallas right now from what I can see on tape after watching 3 games last night.
Yeah, and Mike McCarthy is a long-time coach in this league and has been with the Cowboys for several years now. Kellen Moore just got here, and he's dialing up different things. Like, whether it works or not, there are certainly places we can go, that didn't work, or that really worked, great. But whatever it is, it's different. Every week has been different, or it adds on to something that they did the previous week. And we even saw with that Darius Davis 4th down play. That was something different against the Titans. The next week they tried something different. It didn't work against the Vikings, but it was different. Like, there is something being added. There's layers to this. And I'm glad you said it because I felt the same way watching them, in particular against the 49ers, watching the whole game. Yeah, it really felt like Joe Lombardi's offense. And not that, air yards is everything, right? I think right below or right above the Cowboys in intended air yards is the Chiefs. And I'm not going to tell the Chiefs that they have a bad offense, but it's just not what I thought they were going to go for this year, especially after getting Brandon Cooks. I'm very surprised. And even with Brandon Cooks, you talk about that time to throw, there was that one like snap hike and then just like chuck it really quickly out of the end zone to Cooks. But it's really feels like watching them try to get it to Cooks. It's either a slant, which works, or they try to get it to them down the field pretty quickly. And there's not even really a route development, I feel like. It's very much just so you're faster, go. Like, catch, go, throw it. And it's not working. And it's clearly not working because his target to catch percentage throughout his career is 20% higher than it is right now in Dallas. Like, they are trying to maybe get him the football, but it's 20% lower right now. Like, it is not working with Brandon Cooks. And again, on pace for, 248 yards. I think I could be wrong. I think he had 8,600 something yards going into this season, and he still has 8,600 something yards right now because he only has 73 yards in 5 games. It's not at all what they were hoping for, I'm sure. No. And I don't think what anybody was expecting, even Cowboys fans, in terms of the usage.
Yeah, there was some very concerning comments. You brought up the Mike McCarthy one. But, this summer we heard from Corey Linsley and Rashawn Slater talk about just like the lack of identity from the Chargers offense last year and like how important it was going to be for Kellen Moore to come into this season and establish a real identity on the ground and through the air with Justin. Like, there needs to be like a clear like calling card. And CeeDee Lamb was asked about this yesterday and he was like, I don't know. And he like paused for like a really long time. Like he looked at the reporter and like trying to think like how honest he wanted to be. And he was like, I don't know. And the reporter asked him, like, how do you fix that? He's like, I don't know. And then Jerry Jones on his radio show is asked about, like, getting CeeDee Lamb the football more often. And Jerry's like, no, we want to spread the ball around. It's like, well, please continue to do that. So it's just like, it's like Chargers 2022 all over again when I'm hearing the talk about the Cowboys, watching the Cowboys. And, all that being said, Brandon Staley's defense should be very well prepared to go up against this Cowboys offense because they practiced against it for 2 years. And, like it's jokes, right? But it's true. Like this defense should be very well prepared for what they're going up against. And we talked about some of the reinforcements that they get back. This should be a positive spot for the Chargers defense and hopefully be able to continue that kind of momentum going forward.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to be a big, Thule gets 10 pressures and Khalil Mack gets 6 sacks sort of week. Right. It just seems like the Cowboys are operating kind of like the Dolphins were, where we're just getting it out really quick. But I do think this is a great knock on wood, a great rebound game for the Chargers secondary because, one, there's a lot of recognition of what's in front of them, which has kind of been difficult for them over the last few weeks. And two, because like they're now gelling as a unit. This just feels like the Michael Davis gets his interception game. This feels like Asante Samuel Jr. having, let's have another 3 interceptions sort of game. I mean, again, it's very conservative, so Dak isn't turning the ball over. But if that's kind of all you're doing, eventually someone like Asante Samuel Jr. is going to key in on that and get the interception. And I honestly think he would this week.
Yeah, we heard Nick Neiman after the Minnesota game say that they saw like this one concept and they were waiting for it and ready for it. And eventually the Vikings got to it. and Neiman made a great play on the football, and then obviously Kenneth Murray came down with the interception. Like, that's the kind of vibes that the Chargers defense should have this week. We're seeing these kind of key concepts over and over again, and these are the kind of things that we're looking for. This is the static formation that they're running this out of, and they should be able to be aggressive, be physical, go make these plays and disrupt the timing. And there's a real opportunity for the Chargers defense to, establish themselves and, build that momentum going forward. Like you said, the Chargers pass rush, I think, is going to be in for a little bit more of a struggle this week. The Cowboys offensive line is fantastic, and with the quick trigger from Dak, it's going to be a bit of a struggle to get home. I'm definitely not expecting 6 sacks from Khalil Mack again. But you've got to find a way to disrupt the timing of the routes, disrupt the rhythm of Dak, and if you do, then you can get home, and that's obviously what the 49ers did, obviously, against the Cowboys on Sunday night, and that's what allowed Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, all these guys to get home, is their secondary was just disruptive, like at a really high level. And obviously the Niners defense is not the Chargers defense and everything like that, right? But the concept, the path to victory for the Chargers defense is pretty simple this week. Disrupt timing, get Dak out of his rhythm, and create some havoc from a coverage standpoint and create some havoc from a pass rush standpoint. And the Chargers defense should be in a good spot. I'm not expecting like a shutout. I'm not expecting like 10 points, but I do think that the Chargers defense can make some plays and make life really difficult, from a ceiling standpoint for the Cowboys offense.
And that's really what I think it is too. It's not that they're going to shut them down, but it's from that ceiling perspective. Can you just limit them? And they're going to limit themselves, it sounds like, too. So I don't think these are two very different philosophies, but I do think we're headed towards closer to that Dolphins game from last year, not just because of design, but because they have the same guys out there, although they'll have Derwin James this time. And because, what did the Dolphins do this year? Well, they used a lot of motion to get guys open and to get Tyreek Hill open against this Chargers defense. They learned this Cowboys defense, or this offense, is not adjusting. And so I think if they continue to just be like that and be static and have no identity, then I think that the Chargers defense is in for a much improved day against very good pass catchers.
Yeah, hopefully it's just one of those like confidence building games for the defense and the team as a whole, right? But kind of getting back to the Kellen Moore side of things here, it's going to be very interesting to see how he attacks this, because I think the Cowboys defensive line, for me, is probably the best in the league from a pass rushing standpoint. But the linebackers are injured and can be had when they were healthy. Deron Bland potentially not out there for this team. Obviously, Trevon Diggs is not out there. So, again, there's an opportunity for the Chargers to create some explosive plays here, move the ball with Austin Ekeler. What do you make of specifically how Kellen Moore can, take his philosophy and match up with Dan Quinn in this pass rush for this week, Tyler?
Yeah, lean into the play action game and lean into the downhill run game. I think these linebackers, if Leighton Vander Esch is out, and it seems like he's going to be out for a number of weeks, and if Micah Parsons is not playing edge anymore and they're moving him to linebacker, we'll see how that goes. Yeah, I think the play action game, drawing those linebackers in and running downhill, I think could help. I'm very curious how they go about blocking Micah Parsons in general, not just necessarily on the outside as an edge rusher, but they have him do like what we've seen with Thule, where they line up over the guard or attacking between the center and the guard or whatever. And that has definitely worked. I turn on the Giants game. What did I see? Like the fourth play of the game. He lines up there, gets a sack. Watch the 49ers game, gets a tackle for loss, gets a pressure, whatever it was. So how do they do that? And I was listening to Brandon Thorne's breakdown of the 49ers versus the Cowboys game, and it was a big Spencer Burford game. Like Spencer Burford, the 49ers right guard, he did have a really, really big game, and he did because of stuff like that. I'm very curious now what the Cowboys will do without Leighton Vander Esch too, because they don't blitz a ton, but if they did blitz, it was Leighton Vander Esch. I think he had 31 pass rushes over the last 5 games, and everyone else combined I think was like 19. So do you have another guy that can do that after already losing another guy at linebacker? And do you trust your secondary to hold up in those instances? I don't know. So I think play action would be great, having those linebackers, the newer guys, the guys that aren't out there, biting a bit. I think that'd be great for the team. Hopefully they can run it well. There was a graph, Herbert, what's his EPA versus play action versus non-play action? Good news is he's great at both. So it didn't really matter if it was non-play action or play action. So you're good with either. But I'd love to see the Chargers lean into that this week.
Yeah, from a specific scheme standpoint, I don't know how much stock I really put into the Cardinals beating the Cowboys, but as overarching theme or anything like that. But the Cardinals, their offensive game plan was really, really smart against the Cowboys. And the key thing that they did was invite the Cowboys' rush to get upfield, and then with misdirection runs, RPOs, things like that, zone reads, they were able to take advantage of the Cowboys' aggression. So there's this pin and pull concept, which is like my favorite run concept because it invites people upfield. You get the guards, and the tackles, rolling out in space. And everything's kind of walled off. And if you execute it properly, you give your running back like 3 different cutback angles because it opens up so much space there. And they did this awesome thing where they ran pin and pull, scored in the red zone. They ran pin and pull and got James Conner for like a 25-yard run. And then they were doing pin and pull, run pass option concepts out of it. It was incredible to watch. Drew Petzing in Arizona is doing some incredible stuff down there. And from a schematic standpoint, all of that is already built into what the Chargers have done. They've ran pin and pull a bunch of times throughout the season, and it's been something that they've gone to in key moments against the Dolphins, against the Titans, not as much against the Vikings because it wasn't really there, but against the Raiders, they ran it a couple of times. So there's a real opportunity for Kellen Moore to invite the aggression and then, expose them over the top or expose them out on the edge. And I think that's something that Kellen Moore has been kind of building up here are these concepts that can take advantage of these aggressive defenses. And the Cowboys are one of the most aggressive defensive lines in the league because they're always trying to hunt the quarterback. That's what they do best. And so you've got to say, hey, we're gonna invite you up, and then we're gonna gash you behind you.
Yeah, please blitz Herbert, whatever you got to do, or be aggressive. It seems like not only does Kellen Moore have some of the answers for those moments, but of course Justin Herbert does as well. I really, really hope Austin Ekeler is out there and very healthy and ready to go. I am concerned if he's not out there a ton in terms of pass protection. I believe Isaiah Spiller and Joshua Kelly have allowed 13 pressures through 3 games. 3 games without Austin Ekeler. And I think Ekeler has allowed 20 pressures his entire career. So it's been very, very different missing one like Austin Ekeler. So I hope he's out there to be able to make up for this very aggressive defense of the Cowboys.
Yeah, it sounds like he is expecting to play. I think he said a 99% chance, and he even went as far to tell ESPN Chris Rim that if there was a game last week that he felt comfortable enough to play last week, but Chargers were obviously on a bye, so good things there. But I'm excited, man. From a coaching matchup, Kellen Moore against the Cowboys, I think was probably my favorite coaching matchup of the season. And you have this one circled, and you have Micah Parsons versus Rashawn Slater circled. This is a fun matchup. I'm so glad that it's a primetime game on Monday Night Football, and I can't wait to see how it pans out. Obviously hoping for the Chargers to win, but just from a coaching standpoint, I think this is going to be a really great game to dive into, and I'm glad we were able to do some of that today.
Yeah, we talked about the matchups we're most looking forward to heading into the season. This is the one that I was looking forward to because this is the heavyweight match. I wish Corey Linsley were healthy so it could just be best on best, but this offensive line versus that defensive line, that's a heck of a matchup. Rashawn Slater, Micah Parsons, I forget what list it was, but they had, who was the best player from that class. And I think Parsons was one, and I feel like that's rightfully so, at least. That makes sense to me. But Slater was left off that list entirely.
Yep.
And I think that this is a game where, Trent Williams is Trent Williams, and he'll be Trent Williams until he's not. But Rashawn Slater is that next guy in line, and I can't wait to see how those two go at it, unless Micah Parsons is playing off-ball linebacker, in which case, never mind. But I can't wait to see that matchup. That is an awesome matchup. This whole game has so many storylines and matchups. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, it's going to be a ton of fun. Chargers home game. Hopefully, there's a good turnout as well. I'm not looking forward to all the Cowboys fan narratives and things like that. But on paper, man, on the field, this game is going to be electric. I cannot wait to watch it. Appreciate Brad Spielberger for joining us today. Again, follow him. He's one of the best in the business. Appreciate Tyler for joining me as always. Special shout out to Greg Kim for producing. That's going to do it for us today, guys. We genuinely appreciate all the support, and we'll see you next time. As always, bolt up.